As I briefly mentioned in a previous video, there were major protests in Milan the weekend after the opening ceremony. I had resolved right there and then to do a full video about these movements after the games were over. And so I checked back in on the news pertaining to these protest movements, and there was none. Literally. Not one article more recent than the 9th, anywhere on the internet as far as I can tell. I downloaded the Milan newspaper El Giorno's app to have a look at coverage of either the protests or what they were about from the local Milan newspaper, and I found nothing, at least on the surface. I did find the official site of the Comitato Insostenibility Olimpiadi, and there I was able to find some good pictures of the protests, as well as contact info, from which I corresponded to receive written permission to use their media in this video. You'll see those pictures later in the video. There was also a brief note on the website that basically just said it's not over in so many words, dated Monday the 23rd, after nothing since the 8th. It is well known that Maloney said, then there are those who are enemies of Italy and Italians, demonstrating against the Olympics and ensuring that these images are broadcast on television screens around the world, after others cut the railway cables to prevent trains from departing. It is also well known that Italian police responded to violence against the athletes' village with tear gas, water cannons, and riot gear. It is somewhat less well known that the protests started off peaceful. Local TV studio Telebolino posted a not particularly viral video to YouTube showing a foosball, ping pong, and intramural sports competition from a local non-profit gym that started off CIO's Festival of Protest, known as Utopiati, whose evening program included slam poetry, a root rock concert, a rap concert, a DJ, and a dance music outfit called Harmonica, running from 7:50 p.m. to 4 a.m. So what was all this about? The short answer is a lot of things. You had environmental protesters against the building of bobsled courses and other specialized facilities that, if Torino is any guide, will probably not be used again. You had living cost protesters, antagonized by rising rents, real estate prices, and closing of public spaces, partially to build Olympic venues or cater to Olympic interests. You had Free Palestine protesters demanding Israel's expulsion from the Olympics. You had anti-Trump protesters upset at the presence of ICE as a U.S. security detail. A quick glance at Reddit indicated that many Milanos just saw these protests as angry people looking for something to be angry about. There was probably an element of that. But I think including ICE and Palestine in the grievances was probably a severe distraction. Perhaps even an intentional distraction from the homeland of Machiavelli. Listen, I don't want to talk about the more frivolous wokeisms. The stuff that was just along for the ride and not really about the Olympics at all. I want to talk about the real environmental and social costs that these protests were primarily about. And what it means for the Olympics and the world of sport going forward. As we mentioned earlier, a key component of the Utopiati program was an alternate vision of that humanistic athleticism, separate from the Olympics, and more local and, in the words of the CIO, accessible. Their primary chant was, Riprendiamoci la città, liberiamo le montagne. Let's take back the city. Let's free the mountains. It's worth noting that Riprendiamoci by itself translates to, let's get back together, and Riprendiamo to let us continue. As we mentioned before, Torino lies silent, its bobsled and luge courses decaying, uncared for, wasted scars on mountainsides, fenced off in a perfectly wasteful mothballs of hopeless CYA. Living costs skyrocket, as GDP ekes out a meager 0.7% increase for Lombardy, which contains Milan and Cortina, and 0.5% for Italy as a whole, almost all of it driven by tourism, the junk food of economic growth. Valued public places like the Piazza Ferrara outdoor market are closed off for redevelopment, at the often arrogant direction of city planners. A region the size of South Carolina is declared an Olympic venue, with hundreds of miles of new roads butchering mountains that, since the time of the Roman Republic, have never needed them. Unions are stressed about low-value, low-productivity tourism business taking over the infrastructure and resources, from highways to broadband to real estate to lines of credit, that once supported Po Valley manufacturing and good union jobs, replaced with work that is doomed to never pay well enough for its workers to live, and is too decentralized to organize. To quote the CIO's own article about the protest, those who live in Italy, work, study, are exploited, cannot pay rent, and cannot care. There was no mention in El Giorno about the protests, or the movements behind them. But there was plenty of mention of these meager GDP projections, as well as a significant loss for the stocks at banks based in Milan. The bright spot, economically, house prices. The protests began with the March of the Larches, lamenting and demanding accountability for the 500 larch trees that were killed to build a bobsled course, one that, if Torino is any guide, will be abandoned as soon as the games are over. Now, I don't know if you know much about larches, but they are a beautiful, unique tree that in places like Italy and my homeland of the Pacific Northwest only grow at very high elevations, usually over 6,000 feet in Washington state. They're a conifer that loses its needles in the fall, with autumn colors of brilliant gold. They support unique flora, fauna, and fungi, like the larch bolete and the larch bark beetle, in the valuable, beautiful, and serene mountain meadows they contribute to. Landscapes that, according to Aldo Leopold, were dearly loved by the young men of the Old West. Cowboys would carve hearts in the bark with their name, and that of the rancher's daughter they hoped would feel the same way. Now these meadows, these landscapes, these special places, they are every bit as fragile as they are beautiful and valuable. Mere trampling by foot can destroy them, let alone bulldozers and cement trucks. The protest, with all its divergent elements, began at the Piazza Madogno d'Oro, before continuing down the Vios Brembo, Bonocco, Mincio, Monpiani, and Martini di Corvetto. 10,000 against the Olympic debt, a perceived injustice, fiscal, economic, and social, created by what participants see as a model of international competition that is no longer environmentally or socially sustainable. That being said, there is something else to consider. Torino, 2006, lies abandoned, decaying, fenced off, broken, useless, and disregarded. Some say it is too expensive to maintain and too expensive to remove, and regulatory busybodies would say it is too dangerous to let the public have a free run at the place. But in Salt Lake City, the Olympic grounds from 4 years before Torino remain fully in use. Even the bobsled course, that Olympic oddball, supports an annual summer camp called the Summer Bobsled Experience. From 6 years before that, the Atlanta Olympic grounds of the 1996 Centennial Olympic Games became Georgia Tech's West Campus in the Centennial Park neighborhood. I myself slept in a room that was once home to an athlete when I was a student at Woodruff Hall, and ate where they ate at the dining hall below it. From 64 years before that, the 1932 Olympic Games in Los Angeles gave the University of Southern California its famous Coliseum, where the Trojans still play football today. Lake Placid, in the Adirondacks of far northern New York State, was host to 2 Winter Olympics, 1932 and 1980, and is still defined by its Olympic facilities and contributions. And no, it's not because these places are so remote. Lake Placid is vastly more remote than any place in the Italian Alps. So now, Italy and European Union, this is my question for you. What gives? Why can't you reuse Olympic facilities the way America does? Why must the larches die in vain? And if you're ranging over such vast distances anyways, why couldn't you have simply restored the Torino bobsled track? Torino is actually closer to Milan than Cortina is, approximately 15 minutes by car closer, with vastly more predictable roads. Further, why was Milan even involved? Cortina hosted the Olympics in its own right in 1956, and bobsled was already in the Winter Olympics from the very beginnings in the 1920s, so yes, they had a course. Why didn't you simply have a second Cortina Olympics without Milan ever being involved, and use that bobsled course a second time? So many questions.